In working with a soloist, what do you do to rehearse with Leonidas Kavakos? You said you've worked with him before. Did you have a separate rehearsal? You did with the orchestra today. And the other piece of that is when you are collaborating with a soloist, are you presenting his vision of a piece? Is he sharing in yours? How has that exchange worked out?
You know, I've been fortunate to work with a really large number of living composers. And your experience, therefore, of non-living composers is forever altered. You cannot just say, because they're no longer around to bug me, I can do what I want to their pieces. You know, I'm sorry, Franzel, you know, you don't know how your unfinished symphony goes. I'll show you how it really ought to go. And so I just have this enormous respect for what somebody within the classical music tradition writes. They think very carefully about precisely how to notate something, and the details and the subtleties in the notation of someone like Brahms or Bartók is so intensely acute that you need to really think hard to do something that's not there. So if there's no hairpin crescendo diminuendo mark on one bar, but there is on another bar, you really need to think if you're going to just put one in because you kind of like the sound of it twice. And so I tend to go for soloists who look at concertos not as vehicles for themselves, but as opportunities to use their talent to express what the composer had in mind. And one of the fascinating things is I've been lucky enough to do this concerto a number of times with Leonidas Kavakos, and I've also done it a number of times with Christian Tetzlaff, a violinist I also adore. And the great thing is that, and this is hard to get across as a concept, both Leonidas and Christian play exactly what is in the score. You can get out your metronome, and when it goes from 66 to the bar to 60 to the bar, you can turn on the metronome and they will be playing. Everything is exactly like it has been asked for in the score. And yet, if you were to put me in a sort of blind taste test, like the Campbell's Soup lady in the ads now, where, you know, she says, no MSG, and then these were raised on this farm, I would be able to say, oh, yes, it's Leonidas and he's playing his Strad. And it's not because I'm somehow so amazing. It's that the thing that a musician has when they express themselves is so personal, and for a musician who is listening and familiar with them, it's exactly like picking up the telephone and having someone say your name and you know immediately who they are. And the fabulous thing is that, therefore, neither Leonidas nor I have to argue about, well, you know, how should we do it, or this is too slow, or this is too fast. And so, in fact, it makes for this, you know, natural give and take, and the piece is like Bartók conceived it, and yet at the same time it's always alive and subtly different.
It's the mystery of music and the magic of it. Well, then let's talk about applying those same rules to dealing with an orchestra, especially an orchestra like the New York Philharmonic,
right,
which is a very experienced and virtuosic
right,
body of musicians. So how do you put your vision, which, as you've described, is what's in the music, how do you communicate that with an orchestra and sort of present what you feel might be there, as opposed to perhaps in the case of the works like the Brahms and the Mozart, right, the orchestra's played this before.
Exactly.
So they're not scouring new territory, and they may have a way that they do it already. I don't want to make the comparison of the cow knows the way into the barn, right, already, so right, you don't need to direct it. That's not fair, but the analogy might apply a little bit. They've played this before. How do you tell them how you want it done?
Well, you know, it's a very funny thing, and I guess I was really kind of a young man and just discovering music. I mean, a young man, I was a teenager, but you know, I've got two teenagers, they're young men. And I came across a comment of Wanda Landowska, who now is not thought of at all as somebody, you know, who's correct in early music. But at the time that she was first bringing a lot of this repertoire out of mothballs and playing it on a harpsichord, which was a completely incorrect harpsichord according to what the people had at the time. So with all of those caveats, she would say to people when they'd say, "What are you doing?" She said, "Well, you play Bach your way and I'll play it his way." And of course, that's got real chutzpah, and I think it's great that a lady stood up and said, you know, in your face, guys, because there were not a lot of female performers at the time. But to some extent, the reason I like to go to different orchestras is precisely because I want to know what they think about these things. Listen, I'm so blessed in this particular week. Stanley Drucker is playing in the orchestra. He's playing first clarinet. I think he's 80, and he's going to be retiring at the end of this season. The man has played with everybody. In the year that I was born, he is on one of the Bernstein Young Persons sort of concerts. And there he is playing Copland's music for the theater, and you can recognize it's Stanley, and he has the same energy and beauty of tone and everything now. So when this man is sitting in the orchestra, what I really want to know when I come to conduct is not how I want him to play, but I'd like to know what he actually thinks of music. I want to know what is the actual take of a given group of people on a piece of music. So while I, go to franchises, for food quite often, I love it that Starbucks has made a sort of a classic level espresso anywhere, and so you can go to Waco, Texas, and you can have something that actually does resemble that drink that you have in Italy. But I don't, take my clothes off and go through the TSA screenings in order to have an orchestra play a Brahms symphony the same way in Southern California as it does in Amsterdam, as it does in Sydney, as it does in New York.
Well, now it sounds like you're interested in presenting a particular orchestra's vision of a work. What about when your dedication to the score meets up with an orchestra that plays it in a way that doesn't strike you as meeting the soul of that?
We're trained very much to be really attentive to details in music. And when you think about it, the vibrato, standard vibrato on a string instrument is anywhere beneath about 1/6 of a second. So that's where that there's an alteration of the pitch slightly downward on the fingerboard 6 times every second. And so while we think of the sampling rate, for example, of a CD, which is 44,000 times a second, and we say, oh my goodness, that's so fast, the human brain is doing unbelievable calculations on all sorts of different fronts at the same time. And so what happens is that, let's say that in the music people have something and they're playing it long, and it's got a dot on it which says to us, this should be short. And I then say, could I have that note short? I have never found an orchestra that will say, oh no, you can't have that. We play this music because we love it, but we're not going to pay attention to what the composer wrote. That's not the way that we actually come to this. And so my job is, in a sense, really to know the details of a score so well that, in Eric Leinsdorf's brilliant phrase, I'm the composer's advocate. Brahms can't be there. But I have to have the feeling that if afterwards, after the sort of final arbitration of the orchestra and the audience and the applause, if I were to meet Brahms afterwards and he said, yeah, how did the case go? I would be able to explain it and justify everything that I did, and he wouldn't be disappointed.
And you're suggesting, too, that an orchestra greets a conductor with the same goodwill and willingness to exchange ideas and visions that the conductor has when he comes.
I think it's one of those things you establish. If you come in and, I think if you were to start, say, a rehearsal of a piece for the first time with an orchestra, and you play one bar and you stop, unless everybody feels, whoa, there was a real reason we had to stop, it's better to start again, for whatever reason it might be, there's going to be a sense of, would you let us finish our sentence first? And so I tend to listen to what an orchestra is giving me, and then look for what the potential is in that. There are so many different ways to be faithful to the score and to play music. I mean, this is what I love about opera. If you have a soprano like Laura Aitken doing something, and then you have a soprano like Christina Schäfer doing the same part, they will both sound different because the instruments are quite different and they're different personalities, and yet you can still be absolutely faithful to what the composer wrote. And I think this is the way that you need to then approach the thing and how you come to it.